Well, Ryan, first of all, thank you for doing this. Since, we got in touch and you sent me some of the information about what you were doing, I went down the small modular reactor rabbit hole the last couple of days. And, I'm almost ashamed to admit, like, I didn't even realize that was a thing before you brought it to my attention. And it's super interesting. So I got a lot of questions for you today. In relation to that, and of course how it relates to Bitcoin and stuff like that. But before we get going, whatever kind of introduction for yourself or your work you want to give, then go for it.
Yeah, sure. It's a great honor to be here. I love your work. Haven't missed one of your podcasts and probably going on a year now since the first one I heard you talking with Tomer. I'm pretty new to taking Bitcoin seriously myself. I had owned some since 2017-ish that I had cashed out of an online poker site and then just left it in a wallet and ignored it. And then when the exciting bull run of early 2021 happened, I started to look into it a lot deeper when a few $100s turned into a few $1,000s, which was very excited. And I wanted to know what I was holding on to. And I had some earlier touch points from the past that I remember some of the content that I used to consume occasionally. I would encounter Max Kaiser and his evangelizing about Bitcoin way back in the day. And then I went on with my life and paid attention to various other things, went down the Jordan Peterson rabbit hole over the last few years. Culture wars have been very interesting to pay attention to. And then, so I went straight into Max's podcast. So that definitely helped skip over a lot of the bullshit that many people can get sucked into in the crypto space and jumped right into fully Bitcoin right from the get-go. I played around with trading for a little bit and then moved on from that quickly when I got burned a few times. It was just and found a lot of the guys that were just like, just hold it and forget about it. You'll be fine. So I kind of started sticking at that and then stuck to basic DCA plan. And then as for my career, I'm a laboratory technologist and I work in the Canadian Nuclear Laboratory Facility in Chalk River. My day job is basically I keep the machines operating that do some various work supporting safety and reactor research in regards to the CANDU pressure tube corrosion surveillance program. So that's important. That's a small cog in a very, very important small cog in a big machine. And then, so yeah, I wouldn't even have known about the SMRs myself had I not been in the nuclear industry myself. And that our site here in Chalk River is slated to be one of the facilities that will be building one of the demonstration reactors, a small 5 megawatt unit by a company called UltraSafe Nuclears, and they're planning to deploy that size of reactor to a lot of remote communities and off-grid applications in remote northern Canada, which will be hugely beneficial to those communities that have massive energy costs and have been dependent on very old diesel generators for some time. And then, it was around the time that I started learning about Bitcoin mining that I started going down that rabbit hole. I started listening to guys like Steve Barber and Adam O and all the other guys that are doing the methane flaring mining and various things like that. So I'm very excitedly was talking about my wife with this, who she's come a long way, but definitely did not go as deeply down the rabbit hole as myself. But she's also been a great help and very supportive. And it was around the time that Elon Musk had turned his perception of Bitcoin when he started complaining about the energy usage, that she just threw up the idea of one day offhandedly, just like, well, why don't we use the SMRs that we're planning to build to mine Bitcoin? And then I just stood there for a minute, and then she just went back to her book and reading whatever she was doing, and I'm just yes, that is an amazing idea, and we have to do that. And then so I started digging into it just to see if there was anybody pushing out any idea along those lines in the Bitcoin space, and sure enough, there wasn't. And most of the time, whenever I heard nuclear come up in regards to Bitcoin mining, there was kind of like a sadness almost, because their perception was seeing how many like nuclear reactors throughout the United States and Europe that have been being shut down over the last few years, and there wasn't much hope, and they were just focused on what they were doing with the gas flaring mitigation, and wherever else they could find cheap power, like hydro that's in isolated locations. And so I got on Twitter around the 2021 conference and then just started pushing this idea out there. And then it was in July, this organization that I belong to called the North American Young Generation in Nuclear put out this contest called Innovation for Nuclear, where they were looking for ideas that would boost nuclear's profile in regards to achieving the UN sustainability goals, which, like, I know a lot of Bitcoiners are not the biggest fans of the UN and some of the stuff that they talk about, but on the face value, like the goals like no poverty, zero hunger, like good health and well-being, quality education, affordable and clean energy, meaningful work and economic growth, like those are all good goals that anybody would want to achieve. I saw an opportunity to really push this idea into an avenue that it could really gain some traction. And then so we submitted, I put together a team that included my wife, another guy that I connected to through Greg Foss, and then another individual here at CNL that's close to the SMR program. And we submitted it. We won the first phase and then the second phase, and then we were slated to go and speak in the third phase at an international nuclear conference in Sochi, Russia in May, but that kind of got kiboshed by what's going on in Ukraine. So as of right now, it has been rescheduled for the end of November in Kuriyama, Japan, which is going to be another interesting opportunity to push this idea. And then in the meantime, I've been reaching out to various SMR vendors and just seeing what they think of the idea and trying to connect people that want to invest in this technology with the people that could use some help with investment in this technology, because it is very expensive to get these things off the ground.
Right. Man, that's awesome. And a lot. So your wife works in the same field as you, like nuclear?
She works at the same facility, just in a completely different role. She's more material planning and logistics type of job. Like,
just out of curiosity, like what is your educational background? Like how does one wind up working in the nuclear field?
I'm a chemical technologist. I went to Cambrian College in Sudbury, and I had a few jobs throughout Ontario, bounced around doing various process control and laboratory technologist jobs. And then I was laid off in the beginning of 2013. And then just as my unemployment insurance was running up, I got hired here at CNL, and I've been here for a little over 8 years now.
What's it like working in a field that's, well, so kind of, poorly understood by the general public, I would assume, but also kind of bleeding edge of the future in a sense? Like what's it like working in that sort of capacity? Or if that's not a proper characterization, then correct me.
No, you get to see a lot of cool stuff going on. There is tons of research going on in both the nuclear technology and peripheral technologies that can benefit from it. Like here on site, we're doing various energy storage research, both heat and electrical, hydrogen production type of stuff that will definitely be get a huge benefit from using nuclear power. Poorly understood is definitely an understatement. There's been a lot of FUD in the nuclear industry over the last few years, and definitely since 2012 was when Fukushima happened, I believe. So that's been a sore spot in the industry. It lost a lot of momentum, but it does seem like a lot of that's coming back. Like just over the last few years, it's been growing. Public sentiment has been switching from negative to positive all over the place, and I would have liked it not to have come at the expense of a massive energy crisis, but here we are, and people are starting to really take a second look at nuclear power, and we have a lot better advocacy out in the space, like guys like Schellenberger, Mark Nelson, Dr. Chris Kiefer, Isabel Bomaki, There's another one, Zion Lights is a former Extinction Rebellion activist turned massive pro-nuclear advocate over in France. Like, there's a lot of really good advocacy going on in the space right now, and these people were a huge part in in helping to change the decision to shut down Diablo Canyon that was just announced, a reversal just like a few days ago. So that was very exciting in the industry that that decision was made.
Yeah. Why? Because, we see these headlines of nuclear reactor sites being shut down, and typically it's associated, or at least the impression is that it's out of activist or environmental concerns of some kind. But some of them have been operating for so long. I mean, is that the reason, or is it more economic? Because even though, there's a lot of hoopla around green renewable energy, all that kind of stuff these days, and um I think a lot of it lacks the proper nuance and lacks the proper grounding in economics, and lacks also, you know, the proper political, philosophy orientation, let's say. But if the economics were working, and it, people were, I think people follow generally their incentives, right? Even more so than public opinion. And so is it true that the reason why, these things are being decommissioned, or more aren't being built, is because of the perception or the efforts of, the activists or the catastrophist types over the last few decades?
That certainly doesn't help, but yeah, a lot of it is economics in nature. But the fact that there has been a large anti-nuclear sentiment for the last little while, that it makes it easier to justify the shutting down these reactors. But the economics of a nuclear reactor that has a solid base load, sharing a grid where a lot more wind and solar and intermittent sources are coming online, and then for a minute there, natural gas was dirt cheap. So it was just the competitiveness in the energy markets has not been the greatest as of late in regards to nuclear, because policy definitely favors the wind and solar types, and ensures that they get the maximum economic benefit for their generation, regardless of the circumstances. And then a lot of that burden gets turned into economic liabilities on the nuclear generators, who when they want to be running just about full out all the time to maximize the economics of their generation. But when they can't, they either have to curtail that electricity, and it'll just be in the form of just dumping steam without running it through the turbine, or they will have to sell that electricity to, or well, not sell, or they will pay other jurisdictions to take that electricity from them. In the case of Ontario, a lot of surplus generation gets sent into New York and Vermont and then some northern states, but like at a negative price, which is a massive economic liability. And then because
Right.
Ontario is a regulated grid, the generator still gets paid 8 cents a kilowatt no matter what. So those liabilities end up going on the ratepayers and taxpayers.
Right. Is that your phone that keeps jingling a little bit? Can you put that on
Yeah,
silent, maybe?
probably.
Um,
Sound off. Yeah,
so,
because we're live. A bunch of people are no. Yeah.
um, I mean, is it the case that, if there was just huge deregulation, so nobody paid any mind to all the activists and the global warming and all those sort of types, and oil and gas, was fully deregulated, and there was fracking and all this kind of stuff, would the economics of nuclear, at least for a certain use, and we'll get into the kind of the nuance of the SMRs later, and how the economics of that, would probably be different, or at least the situations in which it would make sense would be different. But would the economics of nuclear just kind of not work if we had, way lower cost of traditional forms of energy?
I think it would probably end up being a lot better, because it would bring more competitiveness into the markets. They would find ways to leverage their assets in a way that would maximize the economic benefits. But yeah,
Right.
because everything's highly regulated, it's just it creates weird disincentives.
Totally. What this is a probably a very difficult question to answer, but like, why is nuclear so expensive to build out? Like, why is it so, yeah, expensive? What are the economics of it?
A lot of it has to do with the licensing and safety regulations on these reactors, and then the fact that a lot of the supply chains and the manufacture of reactors kind of got halted for a significant period of time, so that even now when we want to start rebuilding them, like it's almost like starting over from scratch rather than having a well-oiled, like robust machine that can just pump these things out. Like back in the 70s, these things were coming up everywhere, like at a rapid pace. Like France built like a dozen reactors in just a few years. The United States had built a pile of reactors in a few years. Japan built all their reactors in only a few years. And over time, like as after like accidents like Chernobyl, like there was a large increase in safety regulations, which adds a lot of cost. But there is the benefit of proving that like they're safe and reliable, and a lot of the lessons learned from those incidents have been applied in such a way that incidents like that will like, be pretty much impossible to happen again.
Right.
But it's but at great cost of making sure that that in the public eye that everything is set and there's no issue. And then for nuclear, everything has to be accounted for basically from cradle to grave before a project can even be greenlit. So
How many reactors are there in Canada?
there's the Bruce reactor, I think has 8 units. Darlington, I think has 4. Pickering has 4, or maybe 6. No, they have 8. Then there's a unit out in New Brunswick at Point Lepreau that has, I think, 4 reactors. I'm probably not 100% on these numbers. And then there's 2 reactors in Quebec that were shut down about a decade ago at the Gentilly site. And that is kind of ironic because our current environment minister was one of the head cheerleaders for shutting down those reactors instead of refurbishing them. Whereas Point Lepreau went through a refurbishment program about 10 years ago, so they'll get like another 30, 40 years of life out of those reactors. The Bruce reactor and the Darlington reactors are currently ongoing refurbishment programs, so that'll extend their life into the 60s and 70s. And then Pickering, at the moment, there's a plan on the table for refurbishment, but when the Ontario Liberal government was in place, they had shut that down. And so at the moment, it's slated to be shut down by 2025. But there's a lot of those same activists that were instrumental in keeping Diablo Canyon operational are starting to focus their efforts more towards keeping Pickering online, because that will, like, the nuclear generation in Ontario was a massive reason why Ontario was able to eliminate coal from their grid. But if we go in the reverse direction, we'll have to massively increase our natural gas output. Which it's
So why are the environmentalists trying to shut it down if that's going to be the result?
well, I don't think Pickering, I think, is more economics.
I see.
But just the activists, just in general, like there's just this cohort of activists that just do not like nuclear. They have a lot of ignorant takes about it, about how, like, I don't know, I've heard takes where they liken like a nuclear accident like Chernobyl to like what would happen if a neutron bomb went off, which it's not even close, because that was a steam explosion that carried radioactive particles, but it was not a nuclear explosion like you would get from a nuclear bomb. But it seems that they like to conflate the two, and that ends up scaring the public and policymakers that they can influence. And they are not big fans of the fact that nuclear waste exists, even though, like, there's been no incidents related to nuclear waste ever in the existence of the industry. It's safely stored in lead casks, mostly on site of these reactors. There's a future plans to build deep geological repositories that will be able to store it in underground caverns in such a way that if we want to re-access it, we will be able to, because some of the new reactor designs will be able to reprocess that and then push it further and get a lot more use out of it, so that it will the byproducts from that will, for the most part, be inert salts, and it will dramatically reduce the the size and output of nuclear waste byproducts that need to be stored. And even just in general, like the density of uranium and nuclear fuel is so high that the analogy that people use is basically you could store it on a few football fields, about like one football field about 2 telephone poles high would store like the entirety of the nuclear waste byproducts in North America.
Right.
So it's not that difficult to manage.
As is so often the case, the public just seems to have such a narrow view or understanding of these things, and then of course public opinion does unfortunately in many cases matter. So whether it's nuclear or whether it's Bitcoin or I'm sure a million other issues, we suffer from a lack of education, I guess. And the environment minister you're mentioning, is that Guilbeault guy? I'm not sure, I'm probably
Yeah.
butchering his name. Man, he
Yes.
creeps me out. He's
Yeah.
such a fucking, he seems like an extremist and a weirdo and a Trudeau lackey and all the things that are just deplorable generally, basically.
Yeah, there's a lot of weirdness about the Trudeau cabinet. That's just, but then
Yeah.
on the other flip side, like the Minister of Labor, Seamus O'Regan, he's a big fan
Yeah.
of nuclear because like that's like massive union support, like large labor resources. So it's very conflicting what's going on in there in that cabinet, but
Right.
I don't try to understand it.
No, me neither. Is most of the nuclear around the world and or in Canada fully government funded, government subsidized, joint venture with private? Like what's typically the makeup there?
It's a mixed bag. Like it does require a lot of public support, but for the most part, they're public-private partnerships to various degrees.
Right. Okay. So tell me about, the SMRs, because for a couple of reasons, this seems more intriguing. One, they're way smaller, which means way less cost, which means way more people competing to innovate and build out different iterations and stuff, which means way more market dynamics get introduced to it, which means way more improvement and competitiveness and real world use cases and all that kind of stuff. So for that reason alone, that segment of the nuclear power industry is very, very compelling and interesting to me. And then, like as I said, after you introduced me to it, and I went down the rabbit hole of watching, all the videos and looking at the different companies in the space, it seems really cool and really promising. The costs still seem to be extremely high associated with these things, and your report kind of elucidated that as well. But I don't know. Give me your take on SMRs and why it's interesting to you and the state of the industry and all that.
Well, it's very exciting, and as you mentioned, it's because it does open up a diverse range of deployment scenarios because the small size of the reactors and the fact that the main components will be built in a centralized facility. In Canada, I expect most of that will be done in like the Hamilton, Cambridge area because they do a lot of the material manufacturing that supports the Bruce and the Darlington reactors. But yeah, getting those facilities up and running is going to be a large capital expenditure. But once that's overcome, and that all the engineering and the tooling is done, and then the labor force is in place, then the momentum will begin, and these reactors will become a lot more affordable and be able to be built and distributed a lot quicker. Like the intention is that the designs that are going to be chosen are going to be ones that will be easy to stand up in under most circumstances within 5 years for the larger end of the small modular reactors, which is about 300 megawatts, and then some of the smaller ones in like the 1 to 50 megawatt range. Like some of those will be able to be built within like 6 months to 2 years because the major components will be built in a central facility, and then they'll be designed in such a way that they can easily be transported by standard shipping means, like in just your standard transport freight containers or cargo freighters in various means. So they'll need to be able to prepare the site in advance wherever they're going to be deployed, and then they'll be able to bring in the guts of the core reactor components and the turbines from wherever the the manufacturing facility is, and then that will only take barely a year, 2 years to stand them up, and then they'll be operational. But then after that, then you need your transmission infrastructure, which is then part of the reason that I'm pushing the Bitcoin ideas, because that you can couple them together with a market that will be right there and ready to monetize that electricity as soon as they are deployed, without, and then as the transmission infrastructure gets built out and more people get connected to it, the nature of Bitcoin mining, you can peel off miners and redeploy them elsewhere, or you can add more reactor modules in various degrees. So it's going to be a very, very interesting future for these technologies. And there's Canada, from what I believe, is planning on choosing 6 designs, 2 from each kind of like range from the very small to the medium to the larger small reactors. So it'll be from like the 1 to 50, and then the 50 to 150, and then the 200 to 300 range. There'll be probably 2 chosen from each of those categories. And then for various applications, like for on grid, but not large, in conjunction with communities, but it doesn't need to be like near large population centers like the ones that support Toronto and the GTA area that have a substantial electricity demand. They'll be able to be deployed more to like communities like Timmins and Moose Jaw that have a large demand but not enough to justify building like gigawatts. And then the smaller ones will be designed so that they can go out to remote communities, and they'll be able to basically just replace a lot of diesel generation for communities, and then also for very remote off-grid like mineral mining operations. And then one of the other interests is to convert a lot of the oil sands energy infrastructure to use SMRs instead of using natural gas and oil. And then they also want to use them for the uranium mines that exist like up in northern Saskatchewan. And they by mining uranium with uranium fueled reactors it'll greatly improve the entire supply chain. And then it'll also move Canada further towards the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from a lot of our electrical generation. And then another cool thing about these reactors is some of them are going to be using like high temperature reactors, so that process heat can also be used if electricity isn't needed. The heat can be used for various industrial processes, or even like district heating or greenhouses. We can and basically anything needs heat or like high quality steam for their operations. There's a lot of chemical production operations that require steam to perform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll definitely break into the Bitcoin mining aspect of this in a moment, but on like a megawatt to megawatt, like all in cost basis, from hydro, from natural gas, from a small modular reactor, I presume the latter is way more expensive right now. And the challenge is so an SMR would work in a place where there is no energy access and no energy infrastructure. And for whatever reason, people are there or want to be there, because it's mobile energy effectively. And it's mobile, consistent, reliable, baseload energy, let's say. And that obviously you could conceive of many applications where that would be necessary or useful. But in places where there is some form of energy infrastructure or energy generation, presumably SMR capacity right now, because it's basically in its infancy, would not be the economic choice. And the task is, I say task, but I mean, I'm of the opinion we let the market figure out what the most economical and densest form of energies are, and let it sort it out. And so I'm not trying to impose, quick adoption of SMRs on the world, but my sense is that the technology represents accessing a denser form of energy that's more mobile, that's more versatile. And as a result, over time, the market most likely will choose it. But at the moment, do you have a sense for the comparison between getting a megawatt from these various sources?
Yeah, like it's not going to be able to compete with like established like hydroelectric assets that already exist. it's definitely going to compete with a lot of like wind and solar infrastructure in various locations where it doesn't make sense that, because especially like in northern Canada, like solar isn't even worth trying in many instances. Like
Right.
some places you can get away with wind, but for the most part, these communities are, if you're not hydro, they are running off of diesel generators, and the cost to ship diesel to remote communities puts them like pre-subsidy, some of these places like as much as like 90 cents to a dollar kilowatt hour, which is quite substantial. So those are the primary targets for these smaller reactors. But then, like you said, like as we build more, the cost will drive down. Like it will be able to improve the construction schedules. The designs will be significantly simplified. Will take advantage of, whereas the conventional reactors take advantage of economics of scale. These guys will take advantage of economics of multiples. So as we build multiple reactors, then there'll be like learning with each iteration and more repeat construction, so they'll be faster to build, and then the expertise will develop, and then that will drive the cost down. Like the expectation is that at the moment we're looking at like $40 per $40 to $50 per megawatt to like build these things, but then, or $40-50 million per megawatt for the initial capex, but then roughly like a quarter to a fifth of that once we get to the nth of a kind designs, where we really honed in on the whole manufacturing process and driven down those costs as much as possible.
I noticed that there was like multiple approaches being developed for these SMRs, not just in how much power that they can generate, but also apparently there's a variety of different ways you can the architecture or the engineering behind them can be different, like different approaches to getting power from them. So, and of course, like the degree to which regulations inhibit the ability for the market to figure out which are the most efficient, which are the most cost effective, which are the best, will slow down that process. But what is your sense in all the different options that are emerging and how quickly it's being kind of sussed out which are rising to the top, or if it's too soon to determine that?
We won't really have a good idea until we've built some demonstration models, which we're expecting the first ones to start coming online around 27, 28, and we're going to take advantage of all of the existing licensed nuclear facilities in Canada to build these models. So as far as I know, there's 6 or 7 that are already proposed for demonstration. There's the one that I'd mentioned for CNL. There's the Moltex reactor is going to be built at the Point Lepreau site. So then there are different types. The one at CNL is going to be a high temperature gas reactor. The Moltex one is going to be a stable salt reactor. NuScale is proposed to build one at Pickering, and that's going to be a pressurized water reactor. Hitachi is proposing a 300 megawatt boiled water reactor at the Darlington site. Terrestrial Energy is proposing a 200 megawatt molten salt reactor. X Energy has a small 8 megawatt high temperature gas reactor. Starcore has a 10 megawatt high temperature gas reactor. Westinghouse has a 25 megawatt solid core reactor. So it's really kind of a chicken and egg thing, where like once we start demonstrating them, we'll have a better idea, but then also we won't be able to fully reconfigure the regulatory environment to account for the new types of reactors until they're seen in action and proven what they're claimed to be able to accomplish. So there's great effort to get those regulations updated and modernized, so that we can get this process going a little bit quicker. But yeah, it's a bit of a slog going through the licensing process.
Yeah, sounds like it. Is your impression that this form of energy, if market dynamics were able to kind of maximally determine, or if it was able to avail of market dynamics, would this become dominant source of energy over time for most places? Because if we're getting all these different approaches, and engineering and competition is a massive component of it, do you think like this form of energy will become the cheapest, most reliable, most broadly available and versatile form of energy, for humanity, basically?
I think long term, this is the way to go until we have properly accomplished fusion. That pushing fission and investing in it as much as possible to make it as affordable as possible and widely distributed as possible. That is going there to be the dominant energy source for the foreseeable future. Is we have more uranium available than we know what to do with. Like it's like if we properly exploited how much uranium we have, like it would be the cost of fuel would be almost nothing. Like there are so many deposits all around the world that we can take advantage of. Like Canada only takes advantage of a few major deposits up in like northern Saskatchewan, but from what I understand, there's a lot more getting up further into the northern territories, and then there's places all throughout Africa. There's places all throughout South America that haven't taken advantage. Like Australia has massive uranium deposits that they could take advantage of. And then there's the ones like Russia has some, Kazakhstan. There's a lot, and then on top of that, we will be able to use a lot of the byproducts from these reactors as fuel for certain other reactors that will be able to use, like the plutonium and other actinides that are come out as byproducts that also can be used to create fission reactions. So
Right. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think like this is going to be huge. It's very much going to be a gradually then suddenly type of transition. But once we start getting momentum, it's going to get very, very exciting.
And so fission, breaking apart the atom, right, and fusion, smashing them together. Is that a correct characterization?
Yeah, pretty much. That is the simplest way to put it.
And the latter would generate more energy, more heat, more capacity. Is that the hope?
Yeah, in theory, yeah. Fusion, once it's able to be contained in a sustainable way, will be able to create a lot of electricity in a very small footprint. But we're still decades away from that being feasible, as far as I understand. Like there's a lot of experiment going on and playing around with the various ideas. Like the tokamak reactor that smashes hydrogen together. I think it was just like a year or two ago, they finally announced that they were able to generate more electricity and energy than it took to get the reaction to start. But once they can get it to the point where it can be self-sustaining, then we're going to start to see some real action in there. But it's very difficult to contain, from what I understand. It requires like really strong magnetic fields because the heat that comes off of it is hard to contain with standard materials that we have access to. So, but there's promise there.
Yeah, these are two kind of far out questions, but they just popped up, so why not ask them? But the first is, have developments in artificial intelligence or machine learning accelerated or impacted, the science or the study or the development of nuclear technologies in any way that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, but I don't see why it wouldn't help with like modeling and engineering type of problems if it can be applied to that sort of thing.
And I've heard a couple mentions, and some of the stuff I was looking at over the last couple of days referred to like thorium reactors. And do you know anything about that? And if so, what's the distinction between like an SMR and a thorium reactor?
Well, some of the SMRs may be able to use thorium as their fuel, but it's just a different fuel type. But from what I understand, it requires a significantly different processing apparatus in order to get the thorium to a state where it can be used as nuclear fuel. Like the uranium's a lot more straightforward in preparing it for using fuel, especially in like the CANDU reactors that don't need highly enriched uranium in order to generate a fission reaction.
Right. All right. So let's dive into the exciting component of this for Bitcoiners and as it relates to your work. So you've been making the case in the proposals and competition or that you referred to, that integrating Bitcoin mining with these SMR reactors is an amazing way to generate demand on day one while infrastructure is being built out. And as a result of that, as I think we're all familiar with now, you good?
Yeah, I was just getting my papers together and
Okay.
stuff. Yeah, stuff that I've written.
And that helps, reduce the time to pay off, and it makes it more economical, and it's a highly variable load. So as market demand picks up, you can scale back Bitcoin mining, or you can scale up Bitcoin mining if Bitcoin mining is exceedingly profitable for a period of time, all that kind of stuff. So, why don't you hit me with the way you've been thinking about it and how you've been communicating it to people that I'm sure have no idea about any of this, Bitcoin
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, the way that I'm proposing it to people within the nuclear industry is that it is just a completely new market that they can sell electricity to, that is 100% independent from local grids, and it'll be a significant way that they can completely eliminate the concept of demand risk, because that is one of the major liabilities of deploying a nuclear reactor. Is if you aren't certain that you're going to have demand where you're building, you're not going to be able to sell all of your product, which then just completely destroys the economic case for building them in the first place. And then so none of this stuff never ends up getting built because it's just not feasible. So if you can have 100% confidence that you will be able to sell 100% of your generation capacity to somebody, regardless of whether it's to a local grid, a local industry, or just to the Bitcoin mining network, that will significantly improve the return on investment of building these reactors, and that will drive down the timeline of starting to generate revenue. And because one of the biggest things about the massive upfront capex of building nuclear reactors is that interest starts to add up very quickly when we're talking hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. So like in some cases, just to use the Hinkley Point C reactor in the UK, for example, the cost of building that reactor, I saw a chart the other day that showed that about 60% of the cost of that reactor is just paying off the interest on the capital required to build the thing. So
Wow.
If we can significantly improve the timeline to recoup that investment, that will just drive down the interest alone, and then we start getting into generating revenue. And like, yeah, I'm kind of trying to sell it to them as on the demand response front, because paying attention to a lot of the stuff that's going on in Texas with guys like Sean Connell and Lancium, and how they're developing software that can follow the grid in real time, because they're playing around with a lot of intermittent sources. So that's very important for them to have those capabilities. A nuclear reactor, to maximize your profit, you want to stay on full time. So if you have something controllable on the demand side that you can basically operate like a dimmer switch that will follow your real-time grid fluctuations, they will be able to be much more profitable, much more economically competitive, and then that can justify the deployment of bigger and bolder strategies for how we want to build these reactors. Because like in the current proposals that I'm seeing of how they want to build these reactors, they're like looking at a community that uses, say, 2 megawatts, and they're like, okay, we'll build them a 5 megawatt reactor, and then that should be good, and we'll maybe like put in a desalination plant and like a hydrogen production plant, and that should manage that capacity just fine. But then what I'm seeing with what we can do with Bitcoin mining is we can just build them 20 megawatts right off the bat, and then just fill that entire gap with ASICs, and then that gives the community a massive reliable energy source. You'll also be able to have multiple modules of reactors, so if there's ever an instance where one has to be shut down for repairs or for any other reason, you will have 3 backup reactors that will be able to pick up the slack. And instead of the community suffering from losing that capacity, you just take it away from the ASICs, and then you can just keep running like with no issue. So it's got a lot of potential to do all kinds of crazy stuff.
I guess with any power generation project, the one of the challenges is always trying to build out for demand so that the supply that you're generating can most closely meet the demand that you both are trying to serve now and expect to serve in the future. And, of course, there's a lot of assumptions wrapped up in that, and that can make or break you if you don't do that calculation properly, I imagine. And it's so fascinating that now, I mean, you have to do that because the different sources of demand uh, pay different rates, so it's not like you can abdicate that responsibility entirely, but just the notion that like, that no matter what, like even if you're off on those calculations or assumptions to some degree, you're always going to have demand for your supply at some price. And that, I mean, that just seems revelatory in a certain sense to, I'm sure, a lot of Bitcoiners. What to the people on the economic side of SMRs, who think about these things like financing and the economics of it, not just the scientists. What has been their response to your explaining this to them?
I'm very much working on cracking that nut. There's because it's such a new nascent technology, and a lot of them, what they hear about it, like they hear the mainstream media takes. I'm sure many of them have heard the claims from guys like Digiconomist and various other FUD spreaders. So they see it, yeah, they see the mainstream narrative, and that is a tough nut to crack in many instances. But then once you start getting them down that road of just like, it's just a market to sell electricity to, it really shouldn't matter what the product is. If there is a demand for that electricity, then that's an opportunity for us to make more economic value from the product that we're trying to sell. Like I am actively trying to convince some of the people, like here at CNL, we're developing a hybrid energy systems optimization model. So it's just a complex mathematical models where you can input the various generation sources, and then compare it to like a few like demand profiles from random communities, and you can see the seasonal fluctuations, you can see the like the day night fluctuations in the energy demand. And so they're trying to develop mathematical models to optimize like what is the best mix of your generation sources, whether you want to put in wind and have a natural gas plant, and then some batteries, and then maybe a small nuclear plant, like just playing around with different scenarios like that. So all I'm trying to do with them is just say, here's an extra variable. Now your surplus generation is worth at minimum 4 cents a kilowatt hour, even if you're just using S9s, and just see what happens. And just everything that it fits between what your generation is and what doesn't matter if your local demand is just going like bouncing up and down from day to day. Like we can fill that entire gap, and just what do your new economic profiles look like if we just add in that one little variable and see what happens. So that's an ongoing process right now. Like I think it's like the 3rd generation iteration of those models are being established right now. So I'm in communications with the people that are doing that work, and I'm looking forward to see what the results are, because I'm confident that they're going to see some very, very positive results that will give them no doubt in their mind that this is something worth pursuing.
Yeah, totally. When you mentioned that, they've kind of their perspective is shaped by the FUD, the paid shills and the FUDsters out there. But what, as you said, I mean, it's just a buyer for power, right? Does it make any difference if it's, the kid in Toronto who's paying 14 cents a kilowatt hour to play his PlayStation, or the ASIC who's paying 4 cents a kilowatt hour or whatever it is to do their, to run their computer? What's the difference? So what is it? What about Bitcoin FUD are they finding to be a stumbling block of some kind?
I think a lot of them just think it's just like bad optics, because on like political side, and they just a lot of misunderstanding from like the few people I've talked to. Is just a general statement of just like, oh, cooperating with crypto would be bad optics, and then I immediately have to be like, not crypto, Bitcoin. I always have to make sure to make that distinction clear. Like, we don't care about crypto that does proof of stake. Like fine, we're more focused on proof of work. Proof of work is is the holy grail here for this industry. And I don't care if you want to mine Dogecoin or Litecoin. It's like proof of work is what we're after, and that primarily is Bitcoin, is as far as I'm concerned. The other ones are just sideshows, but it's very interesting conversations trying to go from 0 to 100 and trying to explain it with an elevator pitch, because like I'm sure you know, like there's so much involved, and it takes like hours and hours of research and learning and listening to podcasts to just have like even the simplest of concepts in Bitcoin just finally like click, and then you're just like, oh, I understand the difficulty adjustment now. And like, holy shit, that's like revolutionary. And it's like it just turns it into like just mass, like the game theory is just so amazing. It's just as long as there is a margin between how much people are willing to pay for Bitcoin and how much it costs for you to generate Bitcoin based on the cost of your electricity, like there's going to be a massive race. It's a gold rush as far as I'm concerned. And when you're in an industry like nuclear, where you're generating surplus electricity that basically has a $0 value on it, or sometimes even less than that, like it's nothing but pure revenue. It turns a liability into a revenue stream. Like that's revolutionary as far as I'm concerned for the economics of baseload generation.
Yeah,
So
totally agrees. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can get very excitable, and it can sometimes be off-putting to people, because it's like this guy sounds crazy, like this, and then it sounds too good to be true. But then once you slowly, each reiteration of coming around to it, a little bit more sinks in, and then it clicks with them. But like clearly there's an interest there in the nuclear industry. Otherwise we would not have won this competition and be on our way to present at an international nuclear forum, which is very exciting to.
Yeah, well, I want to ask you about that, but at a minimum, you know, again, whatever they think about Bitcoin, they must at least be intrigued by the notion that there can be a source of constant demand no matter what from day one without infrastructure. I assume that like if like that at a minimum, they must be like, wow, that's novel, because nothing else provides that opportunity. Right now they may still reject it because they're like, oh, crypto's for bad guys and I don't want to be involved. But it, like, do you get some reactions where people are like, oh shit, really? Like, is that actually a thing?
Oh yeah, it is very exciting to see the light bulb click when it finally hits home, that just like, yeah, this is something that's going to change the way that we build and deploy reactors, because it's been a very tough slog over the last decade or so to get nuclear going again after what happened in Japan.
And what kind of you mentioned this in one of the reports you sent me, but to what degree could integrating Bitcoin mining into these various SMRs accelerate their, you know, time to pay off or ROI, or like how much can it improve the economics? Now I know it's not an exact thing because the price of Bitcoin has an effect on it, and the competition amongst miners and the cost of hash and all that kind of stuff, but surely, like what are your thoughts in terms of we have this thing that is nuclear power generation now in SMR form, still very expensive. We need as much competition from the market to come to this space to help reduce the cost of that and make it more available and versatile, et cetera. How much of an impact do you think Bitcoin mining could have on that process?
Yeah, from what I understand, like the current estimates for return on investment for building a lot of these facilities is in the like 25-year ballpark. But I'm pretty confident if we attach Bitcoin mining to it, we could probably drop that down to 15 or less. And like, if Bitcoin does what we are anticipating it to do, then hell, that might even drop even lower. Like we could be making a lot more profit off of these things if like I heard Foss saying like 2 million by late 20s is something that would not be even inconceivable. So like if that were to happen, like that's going to drive a massive gold rush. And then if people start seeing this in action, then it will drive more demand for more people to want to get in on this action. Like I've been talking to I've been talking to an investor that is looking into developing this technology in El Salvador. Like he really wants to get in on that. So that's very exciting. And then so you're probably aware of that meeting that Bekele hosted. Like, what was it, like 40 or 20 or something officials from other countries, and to show them what he's got going on. Like, at least a quarter of those are also courting the idea of developing nuclear infrastructure. So there's a very interesting cross section of countries that are interested in both technologies. So if we start putting them together more, and getting people to see that this is a very real possibility, that we can develop this quickly and affordably. It's going to be a game changer for a lot of people that have been quite underserved by the global markets and for generations.
Yeah. I mean, if Bitcoin reaches, or when it reaches those type of highs, depending on how, quickly or rapidly it does so, you won't have to be convincing people. I mean, there's just going to be an insane rush for energy and power all over the world in whatever form you can get, I would assume. And so, that will probably accelerate things as well, should it come to pass. But if the typical payoff for an SMR is something like, I think you said 27 years, what's their life span? Like, how long can they operate? I understand that every so often you have to change out the fuel or do some repairs or something like that. But, that's a long ass payoff, right? And so only people with deep pockets and good financing, and perhaps in the initial stages, governments might be able to bear
low
something like
time
that.
preference.
Yeah,
very
exactly.
low time preference thinking.
Yeah.
Most of these reactors are expected to have like minimum 40-year life cycles, and then if they're maintained well, like older cars, like you can keep them going for significantly longer. Like we're expecting, like the Bruce and Darlington reactors were built decades ago. We're expecting to keep them going for decades more with the current refurbishment programs going on right now.
Right.
It's
And if they're modular, could you just keep like swapping out modules and keep it going indefinitely, or is there something that would inhibit that?
Yeah. I don't see any reason why we couldn't, or you can just add a new module as you're decommissioning an old module, if that were the case. Like, depends on the condition and the state of the asset, but it's not inconceivable that we can do things like that.
Right. Go ahead.
No,
that's it. Tell me about the competition, because I'm sure this was perceived to be a unique approach. And as we know, most people don't have a great understanding of Bitcoin, and lots of misunderstandings and that kind of jazz. What was it like presenting this to, I guess, both private and public officials and people, and the questions that you received, and ultimately you won 2 of them and you're going on to a third. So that's very encouraging. Some people must be seeing that this is at least novel if they don't fully understand it or appreciate it yet.
Yeah, like the first phase was just, we put together a short video and like a little 5-page paper and just submitted that and just threw it out into the ether, and then wait for the response to come back. There wasn't really any questions or anything related to it. And then they were told that, yeah, you made it through, you're on to the second phase. And then the second one, we did a live presentation to, like, basically a panel of judges. And then there were other judges that judged it after the fact. But some of the questions that were asked were just like, how do we go about doing this, and like what kind of timelines are we looking at? And like the things that I responded to with that is like, in the meantime, it would be great to develop domestic, like, semiconductor manufacturing infrastructure, and get more silicon production, and then like kind of pull that away from where it is right now, predominantly in China and the Asian countries, and bring as much of that domestically as we possibly can. Because if this does get as highly competitive as we anticipate it to, it will be a massive benefit to have it all in-house. Like we already, like in Canada, we already have 90% of the nuclear supply chain we can do domestically.
Wow.
But I see no reason why we couldn't bring in Bitcoin mining, building ASICs, building semiconductors. Like we have the skill set, we have the people, like we can do it. We just need mostly political will and more people with deep pockets and long time horizons. And then as far as like when we can do it, like as soon as the assets are available to plug into, like the Bitcoin miners exist and they are ready and waiting. Anybody in the Bitcoin space that I talk to, they are incredibly eager to start plugging into nuclear power. Like the only current instances that I'm aware of right now are with the Compass Mining and the Oklo pair up, that they want to help Oklo deploy their small modular reactor. And then there's another one in Pennsylvania with Talon Energy is building a large, like multi-100 megawatt data center that's going to be heavy on the Bitcoin mining with the Susquehanna reactor that they have there in that area. So that's very exciting. But
is that TeraWulf? Is that the name of the
yeah,
company?
yeah, TeraWulf is the one. Yeah. So I've been speaking with one of their one of the guys that works with them. He's very interested in discussing SMRs and then how that can be applied to what they're up to. And then there is another project that I'm aware of that's courting the what is it, First Power or Energy Harbor in Ohio. There's discussions right now with them on how to build Bitcoin mines to help boost the economics of the two reactors that they have in Ohio that have been struggling economically as to compete with what was cheap natural gas and also a lot of intermittent sources coming online on the grid that they share. So there's definitely interest, but it's very slow going, and I'm hoping like I keep cheerleading, hoping to push more ideas out in there, and I'm trying to get as many people on the hook from these various SMR vendors to pay attention to this idea that they can very much take advantage of.
Yeah, I mean, they should all be considered, because economic considerations are I'm sure, are one of the biggest considerations for a lot of them, and this should definitely be a part of their calculations. I hadn't heard about TeraWulf until the last couple of days, getting ready for this, and like it seems, well, I mean, it seems like they have, over 100 megawatts plugged in right now. I think I'm not sure if that's 100% accurate, but as you say, they are trying to work with nuclear power generators and their branding and messaging is kind of off-putting to a hardcore Bitcoiner, because it's all like, pro ESG and 91% or 100% renewable or non-carbon based energy sources for their mining. And I looked at they're a publicly traded company, and it looks like they did some reverse takeover or something a while back, because the stock history is like goes back to 2000 or earlier. And, they had quite the run up in, I think, last November at the height of things. I think their stock was at like $45 or something. And now it's like $1.90 or something, which is, quite the fall. But I think the market cap is still like 400 million or something. So they were valued at a couple $1 billion in November, which is crazy. But, markets and frothiness and money printer. So,
yeah, ultimately, Bitcoin doesn't discriminate about where it gets its electrons from. That's a human problem.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
And so what then this next step that's now going to be rescheduled for Japan, what happens there? And like, if you do well, what happens? Like what trajectory is this process of presenting this idea and to being in this competitions? Like, what is the end goal if everything goes well?
Well, right now it's a free trip to Japan, and it also gives me an opportunity to promote this idea. I have no idea what the results of that are going to be. From what I understand, there's going to be 8 other teams from various other global districts that will also be promoting ideas that they've had. For all I know, 1 or 2 of them might be barking up the same tree, which would be very interesting to see the different ways that it gets framed. Because like mine was mostly framed around Canada's SMR program, but like that would be awesome if there's more people's like poking around this idea. But I see it as a great opportunity for networking with people within the nuclear industry that would be able to benefit from it, and so that I can do a little bit of face-to-face talking with them and really just just keep pushing the idea out there to anybody that's willing to listen, and just sell them on the idea that there's a new market they can sell to. And then like, not only because then there's multiple ways that they can go about doing it. It doesn't have to be like, they can either collaborate with an established Bitcoin miner, like they can call up Harry from Grid and be like, we want you to build a facility alongside our reactor, or they can hire somebody like Harry and that works for the company, and then they could own the Bitcoin mining assets for themselves, or they can do some sort of hybrid of that. They can like buy portable mining units, like the ones that the guys at Cathedra are building, or that the guys at Upstream are building. Just take out the gas generator and put in more ASICs, and there you go. It's already ready to deploy with the SMRs. Like the technology is being established now. It's going to be used when we get to the point where the SMRs are ready to use it. So I'm hoping that when we do demonstrate these reactors, because part of the plan is that they want to, alongside them, they want to demonstrate a bunch of other technologies that can take advantage of the nuclear generation, like the various chemical productions, desalination, the like district heating type of stuff. But I'm pushing for like Bitcoin mining to be part of those demonstrations, so that we can already have an established kind of idea of how this can work, like well before we start widely deploying them commercially. Because Canada, like, not only does Canada want to deploy them domestically, they want to take advantage of the international market for exporting these things. So that's why, like, talking to people in places like El Salvador that are also interested in this technology will really start to get that ball rolling, and it'll show that there is large market demand for these products and then that just it boosts the confidence of the investors, and then it will greatly have great positive effects on the industry as a whole, once we've proven that this does what it claims to do. But yeah, until we get to that point, it's just a lot of promotion, building relationships, forming collaborations, and making sure that all of the necessary stakeholders that are going to be involved in these projects have buy-in, especially with like remote communities. It's very, very important, especially with the indigenous communities, that they are seen as partners and not as something being imposed upon them.
Right.
So
Well, I mean, who knows how the political and regulatory landscape will pan out. I despise such things, and only peripherally pay attention. But as far as Canada is concerned, I mean, I got to think that if someone like Pierre Poilievre got in and Trudeau was booted out, that would bode well for innovation and exploring and allowing competition and innovation to take place in a budding industry like this, and that would be good. So, hopefully that's correct, and hopefully that that comes to pass. Do you think? Do you think that the end game here is, you kind of alluded to it just now, but vertical integration within power generators, and then they're mining on their own rigs, and even I'm sure designs will come up that take advantage of synergies between the two activities and the heat that's generated and all that kind of stuff. Because right now it's early days, and even with the natural gas mining and hydro and stuff, typically the power generators, the power producers, they don't know really much about Bitcoin or Bitcoin mining, that they'd rather say, sure, we'll give you a power purchase agreement and you just manage everything. But presumably, as this becomes more widely, people are educated about it and they understand it better, they're going to want to capture the arbitrage for themselves, right? And so there's an incentive there for them to integrate that mining into their own business. Do you kind of think the same is going to happen with nuclear?
absolutely, it's only a matter of time, because then not only just that, like, it has the properties of being able, like, to balance the grid in various
Right.
ways. Instead of yeah, I was talking with my dad, who's retired hydro operator, and he was telling me about various things, like that they have like transformers that are along the lines that if there is a spike in generation or a drop in demand, that they will absorb that shock to maintain the grid stability within that band of frequency that they need to maintain. And like, I see no reason why like Bitcoin mining can't be adapted into things like like that. Like that's
Mm.
the stuff I've heard, like guys like Sean Connell talk about that quite a bit, and like, he's very familiar with those operations because that's his former life as a grid operator type of guy. So he's
Hmm.
so and like all the guys that I'm hearing talking in this space that are having these conversations, they are 100% confident that it is only a matter of time before there's just full vertical integration. Either it's going to be well-established Bitcoin miners just full out buying their own power assets, or power asset owners starting to buy Bitcoin mining operations for themselves. It's going to be a completely mixed bag, but what I know is it's going to be very exciting for people like us that are very, very eager to see how this technology plays out going into the future. It's fix the money, fix the world, and then you can get into all kinds of other crazy stuff like learning about how the Fediments is going to work, and then combining that with the Lightning Network. Like each company can have, or even community can have their own little federated mint that they have that they can manage basically their own little community bank, and then they can develop like lightning channels between each other for trading partnerships. And then like along the nuclear supply chain, like if companies were to have Bitcoin as an asset on their balance sheets, they can completely eliminate the need to use credit cards and the traditional banking infrastructure, and they can just create a channel between all their supply chain partners, and just they can one person sends material and supplies one way, and then you zap the lightning payment the other way, and there we go. Or what was the other one I heard? There was someone talking about how like if you have a substantial amount of Bitcoin, and then you can basically like lease lightning liquidity and
Mm.
do things like that. Like there's so many opportunities on the table that these companies and industries can take advantage of. Once that ball starts rolling, more people are educated on what is actually possible. I think we're going to start to see a lot more of that start popping up on the next bull run, because as we know, bear markets are for building, and then it'll all be there and ready when the bull market comes back around, and people will be like holy shit, there's all these new cool things that we can do that weren't there before. And it'll like
Mm.
blow away like all the FUD about how it's how it doesn't scale well and uses lots of electricity. And yeah, we generate a lot of electricity. We need somebody to take it. And if the Bitcoin mining is going to be an energy pig, then so be it. We'll feed it, and we will feed it a lot of electricity produced by nuclear fission. Why not?
Yeah, it's unceasingly mind-blowing to consider all the different impacts that this is going to have. And the energy one is getting a lot of attention now just because it's so exciting that you can you can find an energy asset anywhere in the world, and you can turn it into electricity, plug in some miners, beam it up to a satellite, and what you get in return, you convert that energy into a globally saleable money and store of value asset that you can procure the rest of the things you need with. And it's mind-blowing the type of possibilities that represents. Whereas currently, and certainly in the past, but still very much now, there's so much friction in all those different things, and there's such a there's so many hoops you have to jump through, and so many things are siloed in different ways. Like you might have an asset in one place, but there's no people, or you need to get foreign currency in order to sell this. And like there's middlemen all over the place. There's rent seekers. And just for all that to go poof, you got energy, convert it to money, convert the money into whatever service you need. Boom, you have a flourishing, town, community, society, civilization. And, this is what we all get excited about is watching that unfold, and the potential and the possibilities that it represents.
No, it's crazy exciting. I can't wait to see how it all unfolds. Like just for myself, like I have a few ASICs lying around the house, just a few S9s, and I recently blew the heating element on my dryer. So I'm just like, why repair that in the conventional way when I can just take my S9, I can duct it right into the intake of my dryer, and now my dryer mines Bitcoin. It takes a little bit longer to do the job, but it works. Wife was very happy that her dryer still works and she didn't have to keep putting stuff out on the line.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so let's fast forward to like, I don't know, 50 years in the future. Do these SMRs become consumer level? Like, now, of course, there's, maybe you have a citadel and there's like 5,000 people living there and there's a big reactor and that powers it all. But even if you want maximum sovereignty and independence, you got a little cube out in the backyard and it provides your power and your ASICs are integrated in and that generates heat and whatever else you need for your home. And it's all just smooth, easy. It's like a Tesla Powerwall on the side of your house, but does a bajillion times more important things or, more things.
Yeah. From what I understand, Westinghouse is proposing a reactor design called the eVinci that's going to be like less than a megawatt, like 500 kilowatt type of deal. Like it's going to be the size of like a typical like backup diesel generator that you see hooked up to like a hospital or a restaurant or a school or something like that. That's going to have some pretty wild implications if that is able to hit the consumer level. We're going to see ranchers picking these things up all over the place. It's going to free a lot of people from just dependence on centralized systems. If you have a massively abundant energy source that'll just last for decades.
Massively abundant and versatile in terms of mobility. I mean, once you have that, and you have, now we have connections to the internet basically anywhere you are in the world. I mean, you build pretty much whatever you want, right? You've got cheap, abundant energy. You've got connectivity to the world. You've got a money that's accepted globally, that can't be debased, all the stuff we know Bitcoin is. I mean, the possibilities are literally endless when you're in that type of world. And I don't know, do you think we'll see it? Do you think we'll see it in our lives?
I don't know. I remember watching Tomer's video where he was predicting he's hopeful around the 50s or 60s that we start seeing a lot of this change. But I'm very excited to watch the transition happen. Like I know things are very tumultuous right now, but I think if we can get through the 20s and into the 30s relatively unscathed, I think it's going to be a very different horizon in front of us that we are going to be able to take advantage of. Like this is going to unlock so many things that we couldn't even conceive of right now.
Yeah.
Sure. Like even just the things happening on Bitcoin right now, just like 10 years ago would have been like completely inconceivable. Like nobody saw things that we can do now coming. Like the fact that you can now send a payment in your currency of choice through the lightning rails and it pops out the other end in your receiver's currency of choice. That blows people's minds when I explain it, that is something that can be done. And they're like, you mean we don't have to pay that 3%, 5% credit card fee anymore? It's like, no, you're done. No
wait 4 days,
final settlement.
2 days.
Yeah. Like I just this morning, I needed my wife to send from her Moon wallet to my Moon wallet so that I had enough money to send to Sama to sign up for the men's group that he hosts. I think you did a podcast with Sama, the Kataro. Yeah. So I've signed up for his men's group. So she sent me the lightning payment and then I sent it. So I sent her the address through text and then he sent me his Bitcoin address and then I sent it to him. I have no idea where in the world this guy is, but boom, it was there. It was with him within seconds and done. Like that's freaking amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible. And that's really the thing, like all these people that are Bitcoin haters or fudsters or whatever. The real thing is to get them to use Bitcoin. Be like, look, intellectual understanding is one thing, and monetary and economic philosophies and whatever your opinion there is, that's one thing. Why don't you use it? Why don't you see the power of custodying your own money through 12 words? Why don't you see the power of actually sending a transaction to someone halfway across the world, in 1 second for 1 penny or less? Then you'll get, I mean, it's hard not to be amazed by it. It's hard not to think like it's a kind of a type of magic. And I think a lot of the FUD comes from people that have never actually interacted with it in any meaningful way. They've never done what you just described. And of course, to them, as a result, it seems relatively meaningless.
Yeah, like I've started just anybody that I can, like local farmers that I've been buying honey from, eggs from, I'm telling them that like, I'll buy your stuff, but you're going to accept Bitcoin for it. And like at first they're hesitant, and then you do it, and they're just like, holy shit, that was so easy. And now they're just
Yeah.
they're on board. I'm
Yeah, it's
trying to
wild.
go like farmers markets, yard sales, like yeah, just pitch to everybody. Just propose the idea. If they're really resistant to it, I'll just be like, yeah, whatever, here's some cash. But at least plant the seed and just see what happens.
100%. And it's love to see, it's great to see those like amazed reactions on people's faces. Actually, Gigi made like a card that he prints out, and the card says, this could have been, and then he leaves I think a blank space to put in how much Bitcoin, but you're forcing me to pay in shit coins. And he gives it to them like with his payment in cash or whatever the person is asking for. It's so great, because presumably they'll look back on that card at some point in the future and be like, oh fuck, I'm stupid. Have
Yeah, I like
we
the Bitcoin is shit website. You ever gone through
is that
that?
the one
Yeah.
like the cost of different things? Had you bought
Yeah,
them in different years or
yeah.
something?
If
Yeah.
you'd have bought Bitcoin instead of this, then it would be worth this much now. Yeah, that's always a fun one to.
Yeah.
But
Have we not covered anything regarding the work that you're doing, or this topic generally, that we should explore before we shut it down?
uh, I think we've covered a lot. But there is one fun one that I do like to talk about. But this is like way out there game theory. But
Do it.
if we generate enough incentive that like people that there is a strong drive for nuclear power, like from what I believe, that not only will that prevent nuclear fuel from being diverted to weapons production, but it could also start driving an incentive towards deproliferation and reprocessing those weapons into fuel for more hash rate. Like if Jason Lowery's thesis plays out that like that this is going to get so competitive that nation states will be competing in hash wars, like it's not inconceivable that they will go balls to the wall, like throwing everything that they've got at this. And if that involves tearing down those nuclear weapons to get more nuclear power generation, to get more hash rate, that would definitely be something worth pursuing. And it's
Yeah,
all game theory,
I
but it's who knows.
I agree. I mean, that's a question I discuss with a bunch of people. Like, the Bitcoin renaissance is great, and I see it happening, and I see how so much of it is going to take place. But what about the big red button and the nuclear arsenals in the world, and just crazy motherfuckers that in times of great change, or if they're losing their power, might, freak out and do something with it. And there's never a good answer to it, because nobody really has a good answer to it. But I don't know if you planted that seed in my mind or someone else did recently, but it's not a bad one. I mean, there's not many great options regarding it. And if we're thinking like here's a question. Is that method, is that like economical more so than just going through the normal process of getting the uranium for a reactor? Or is it
From what
just kind
I
of a desperation play?
the 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 process and technology to do it already exists, and I'm pretty sure in some instances it has been done, because I do believe a lot of the nuclear arsenals had been scaled down at some point in the last decade. That was some of the stuff that like I think even like Trump was working on that with Russia to start scaling everyone's nuclear arsenals down. There's definitely some players out there that are unpredictable wild cards, but if if we can put the right incentives in front of them, like who the hell knows what the future holds? Like
But
I would love to see this country
that's like
turned around.
a well-established process of decommissioning nuclear weapons into nuclear fuel for reactors.
Yeah, that has been done. It's not super common, but the
Right.
technology to do that exists, and could easily be scaled up if the desire and the political will was there.
Yeah, well, the incentive to acquire Bitcoin is presumably going to be extremely strong. So I guess it comes down to, do you want a nuke or do you want a bunch of Bitcoin? And it would be
Who
great
knows?
if people answered the latter in the affirmative, or preferred the latter.
Yeah, it's only a matter of time before we start getting Bitcoiners into political positions. Like who knows? Pierre might be the first one that we can get, and then just start the ball rolling from there. And then if he puts things in action, then and they work. Like he's definitely taken a lot of heat recently, because like, oh no, the price went down, and like Bukele's taking heat because the price went down. But then like yeah, you look at the other numbers and it's like, but tourism is up and remittances are up. So what, the central government's treasury has gone down, but
Yeah.
as a whole country, their wealth has gone up, which I see that as way more beneficial. Like he made a sacrifice of his own wealth, or that he manages for the country to benefit the entire country, which is freaking awesome.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that nobody, there's many things that normies and normie news media and stuff don't consider. But one is just the unit of account. And in Bitcoin, we say 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin, and people think it's kind of a LARP and it's a way to rationalize, to stay calm amidst volatility and stuff like that. But what they're doing is saying 1 Canadian dollar equals 1 Canadian dollar, and therefore everything versus it is volatile, but it is not. But if you change your unit of account, then you would have to account for the fact that, in terms of monetary inflation, the Canadian dollar has inflated like 40% over the last 2 years, or whatever the precise number is, right? And so instead of being that thing of stability against which exterior volatility is measured, you're actually recognizing the volatility inherent in that. And so, okay, Bitcoin's down like 60-70% from its highs, and the Canadian dollar is down 40-50%. Well, the relative difference then becomes a lot less extreme. And the only thing that you've done is you've made a decision, like, which one is going to be the thing against which I judge everything else, which one is going to be my unit of account. And of course, all of us are like, well, obviously it's Bitcoin for a multitude of reasons. But that argument requires nuance. And again, the mainstream media and politics is not known for their nuance.
Well, I like Tomer's analogy that the lighthouse looks unstable when you're on a ship rocking in the sea.
Great analogy. Yeah.
But then, like, for us here in Western countries where we have been privileged to have relatively stable currencies, we don't really take in the perspective of the global South, and it has dealt with all kinds of crappy economics, and all the African countries that are still saddled with that stupid French currency that just like won't leave them alone, and the South Americans that are scrambling for US dollars. They get this. They get that they need something that has stability at the core protocol, because we can't keep relying on currencies that can just wildly change based on the whims of politicians and bankers and these wise men that we, I don't know, put so much value in. It's, I don't know, that's definitely
so much false, misplaced faith in, you might say. But as nature is healing, right? The water always finds its level, and so the global South has been so disenfranchised for so many different reasons and for so long. But as a result of that situation they're in, there's a necessity, and as a result of that necessity, when a solution emerges, they're the first to adopt it. Now, I know there's been a lot of Bitcoin adoption in Western Europe and North America, so it's not a perfect thing, but maybe broader scale non-early adopter populations, like, there's a far greater incentive for them to learn about it and to adopt it. And presumably over the course of decades, that action taken when it's taken, and versus when it's taken by the majority elsewhere, will help to balance the scales over time and rectify some of the things that have been done to them unfairly over the course of the last 100 years or so.
Oh yeah, it's going to level the playing field for sure. And then just on like things like the education front, that opens up so many opportunities for people that have been disenfranchised to get proper educations. And then if we can do things like if we drive down energy costs, that also drives down food costs and water sanitation costs. So then that helps all of these people get off to a better head start. I was listening to a recent podcast. Jordan Peterson had on Bjorn Lomborg, and they were talking about his stuff and how he rank ordered all of these plans that the UN has, but that it's just everybody's got something that they prioritize. But he put together all the economists to get a good rank order of them, and the top of the list was just reduce poverty, because if you want to help the environment and reduce like greenhouse gases emissions, poor people don't give a shit about the environment when they're just thinking about finding food for the next day. If they were wealthy, they would start to care more about their environment, because then that would gradually increase their time horizon, and they would start thinking more broadly into the future.
Yeah.
Like it's
The problem is, and while I agree with that assertion, so many in that class or group of people think one of the ways to alleviate poverty is just to, you know, forcefully reallocate capital, or to do so from in a top-down perspective. And what that ends up doing is, in most, well, almost tautologically destroys capital and almost exacerbates or perpetuates the situation. So all of those people, this is my kind of I'm a Bitcoiner, obviously, but if they're not talking about Bitcoin, right? If they're not integrating Bitcoin and the various solutions that it represents to ameliorate that issue, or to bring about what they're discussing, it's like I almost don't have that much time for it, because it seems the conversation seems so lacking of the most important thing, and so, which is why, in Bitcoin, are kind of our own clique, right? Because we wink at each other and we know that that's the thing that's missing from all these conversations, and Bitcoin fixes this. So while I appreciate people like Lumberg and Peterson and stuff talking about these issues, and at least bringing attention to it, and certainly painting a different picture than like the insanity of the mainstream perspective on a lot of this stuff, Bitcoin has to be integrated more for it to be a serious discussion.
Well, that's where we come in. We consume all of these different ideas from all of these great thinkers, and integrate them in such a way that we can start moving that ball forward.
Exactly.
Everybody takes their own mission. Like, I love seeing just how much diversity there is in the Bitcoin space, of everyone just kind of working on different projects that touch different parts of everybody. Like seeing the different education programs they've got going on in El Salvador with the Mi Primera Bitcoin, and how that's now basically been integrated as a compulsory class in schools and to graduate high school. Like, I did not see that coming, but it's like, why not like get that next generation? Like, even like all of the tyrants of the world knew, like, capture the kids and get that next generation, and then that's how you can really start imposing your will upon the culture. So we can do it for the benefit of the culture, instead of for the negative, to appease some authoritarians' grand plans of centralized control. Yeah, there's too
100%.
many of them. There's too many of them running around these days.
Yeah. Bullish on Bitcoiners. Bullish on Bitcoiners, as always.
Absolutely.
Ryan, this has been great, man. I appreciate you sharing all your knowledge and experience about this stuff with me. We'll definitely have to do another one in the future. I know this is like this. It sounds like this is a slow, ongoing process. So, you can let me know when there's sufficient updates and materials to do it again. But any final words before we shut it down?
The future looks bright. Like, there's a lot more hope in the world these days. Bitcoin being that shining light in the darkness. Things are looking messy in a lot of places, but I think we can get through it. I'm very confident that this is going to be a big piece of the puzzle.
Amen, brother. Couldn't agree more. Well, thanks again, man.
Yeah.
And we'll keep in touch, and we'll talk again in the future.
For sure. Yeah. You'll see me around on Twitter and Spaces and various other venues.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was great.
Right. Take care,
talking
brother.
to you. Thanks.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.